The sun was cruel that afternoon, glaring down on the plains like an unblinking eye, and Caleb's boots sank heavy into the dirt with each step. He had walked miles without water, carrying two suitcases that felt heavier with memories than with clothes. His beard was gray, his back bent, and his eyes once sharp as a hawk's looked tired, hollow, as though the world had finally drained the fight out of him. He wasn't coming to this town to start a new life. He wasn't coming for work. He was simply coming because his legs had carried him here, and he had nowhere else to go. At the edge of town, a handful of children played in the dust, their laughter rising in the still air. One of them spotted Caleb and stopped, eyes wide. Soon enough, their mothers appeared, two women stepping from the porch of a weathered wooden house. The other wore faded green, her hands dusted with flour as though she'd left her baking behind. They shared a glance, unspoken words passing between them. Before walking toward the weary traveler, "You look like you need more than a drink," the one in brown said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. Caleb tried to smile, but his lips cracked instead. The woman in green reached out gently, steadying him by the arm. "Come inside. Rest a while. The heat will finish you if you stand here any longer." Caleb hesitated. He had slept under stars, in barns, in the ashes of burned-out homes, but rarely under the roof of strangers. Still, the ache in his bones left no choice. He followed them into the cool shade of the house, lowering his suitcases with a heavy sigh. The scent of bread and wood smoke filled the room, and for the first time in weeks, he felt the faintest trace of safety. What he did not yet know was that these two women, Sarah and Clara, hadn't taken him in by chance. Their kindness, though real, had a purpose of its own, and in the days to come, Caleb would discover that their lives, and his, were bound together by more than mere pity. Caleb rose early the next morning, the weight of the previous day still heavy in his bones. Yet there was something different in the air that stirred him to move. The small ranch house smelled faintly of fresh bread, and through the open window he could hear the clatter of pots and the soft murmur of women's voices. For a moment he wondered if it was all a dream, if he would open his eyes and find himself back on the endless road. But then the door creaked and little footsteps hurried across the floor. Clara's young boy, barefoot and curious, peered at him with wide eyes before darting away giggling, and the sound made Caleb's chest ache in a way he hadn't felt for years. He dressed slowly, walked outside, and found Sarah already working by the corral. Her sleeves rolled, her hands rough with rope and wood. She looked at him with that guarded expression, the one that seemed to weigh every man's worth before he spoke, and simply said, "If you're staying under this roof, you'd best learn to work with it." Caleb nodded without protest, picked up a hammer, and began to mend the broken fence posts alongside her. The hours stretched, the sun climbed, and though sweat ran down his brow, a quiet peace filled him as he worked. Clara brought water, her smile softer than Sarah's sharp edges, and for a brief instant he imagined what it might be like to belong somewhere again. But as dusk fell and supper was eaten in weary silence, Caleb sensed something unsaid lingering in the room. The women exchanged glances when they thought he wasn't looking, and though they had welcomed him, their eyes carried a weight of expectation he could not yet name. When night came and the others slept, he sat awake on the porch, staring at the stars. From inside, hushed whispers drifted through the thin walls, Sarah's voice low and insistent, Clara's voice trembling with doubt. They spoke of him, not with distrust, but with urgency, as if his arrival was more than chance. Caleb's hand tightened on the handle of his suitcase, the truth dawning slowly. These women hadn't offered him shelter only out of kindness. There was something they needed from him, something that might change his life in ways he had never imagined. Caleb woke before the sun, out of habit more than need. The little cabin was quiet except for the faint creak of old timbers and the distant sound of a rooster. Somewhere down the road, he pulled on his boots, careful not to wake the children sleeping in the adjoining room. For the first time in years, he had a roof over his head that didn't leak, a bed softer than dirt, and the smell of fresh bread drifting from the hearth. Yet peace sat heavy on him, almost suspicious, like a saddle that didn't quite fit. Outside, the air was cool, carrying the scent of dust and wood smoke. He walked the perimeter of the property, running his hand along the broken fence posts and leaning rails. He He could see the callous touch of Sarah's labor, the careful stitches of Clara's mending, all holding together a ranch too big for two women alone. Caleb bent down, tested a rail with his weight, and shook his head. By mid-morning, he had a hammer in one hand and nails in the other. The women came out one after the other, surprised to see him working without being asked. Sarah's brows rose, her sharp eyes softening just a little. Clara, gentler in her manner, offered him a cup of coffee, steam rising from the tin mug as the sun finally tipped over the horizon. The children gathered to watch, whispering among themselves, wide-eyed at the stranger who swung a hammer with quiet determination. But not all eyes in town were so forgiving. By noon, a pair of neighbors rode past slow, their horses kicking up dust, their stares colder than morning frost. Caleb felt their gaze linger on him, then shift to the women, a silent judgment passing between them. He kept his head down, but he noticed the way Sarah stiffened and Clara's smile faltered. Whispers traveled faster than the wind in a place like this, and a man with no family, no land, and a shadowed past was bound to stir them. That night, after supper, Caleb stepped out to the porch for air. Through the thin walls he heard Sarah's voice, low but edged with worry. "We don't know if we can trust him. Clara, you saw the look in town today. What if he brings more trouble than help?" A pause. Caleb stood still in the dark, suitcase heavy, heart pounding, realizing he wasn't just a guest, he was a gamble. Caleb woke before dawn. For the first time in months, he hadn't slept under the open sky. The roof above his head felt both foreign and fragile, as though he might wake to find it gone, and stepped outside into the chill of morning. Sarah was already at the well, her sleeves rolled up, drawing water with practiced strength. Clara joined her a moment later, carrying a basket of laundry. They looked at him in silence, and for an instant Caleb felt the weight of being an intruder. But Sarah only nodded toward the barn. "If you've got the strength, the fence near the west pasture needs mending. Boards are loose." It wasn't a request, not exactly, but Caleb welcomed the work. His hands, rough and cracked, found purpose again in the rhythm of hammer and nail. Hours passed in labor, sweat carving lines through the dust on his face. By the time the sun climbed higher, he had repaired two panels and tightened the gate. The children came running with a jug of water, their laughter piercing the silence that had long guarded his heart. For a moment, he allowed himself to smile. That night, after supper, he lingered on the porch, listening to the creak of the rocking chair beneath him. Their words carried just enough to catch. "He works hard, but can we trust him?" Sarah's tone was steady, but edged with concern. Clara's reply was softer. "We didn't bring him in just to patch fences. You know that. We needed someone who could stand with us when the time comes." Caleb froze, the warmth of supper turning to ice in his stomach. He set his jaw, staring out into the darkness. For the first time since he'd arrived, he realized their kindness wasn't simple charity. There was more to their plan, something unspoken, something waiting in the shadows, and he was at the center of it. Caleb had grown used to silence over the years. On the trail, silence meant safety. In the bunkhouses, silence meant exhaustion. But here, in this little cabin with two women and their children, silence carried weight. It pressed in around him at night, thick as a quilt, as though the walls themselves were listening. That evening, after the chores were done and the children tucked away, Caleb sat by the fire with his hat in his lap. Neither woman spoke much, yet Caleb felt their eyes flick toward him when they thought he wasn't looking. "The fence hasn't held that strong in months." Caleb nodded, clearing his throat. "Work keeps the hands from rustin'. Don't need much else." Sarah glanced up from her stitching. "Maybe, but hands that strong could be put to more than fence posts." There was something in the way she said it, not unkind, but weighted like a stone dropped in water. Caleb shifted uneasily. His instinct told him there was more here than generosity. When the fire burned low and the women retired to their rooms, Caleb stretched out on the cot they'd given him near the door. Sleep didn't come. The moonlight cut a pale line across the floorboards, and the rancher's ears caught whispers drifting from behind a closed door. Sarah's voice, sharp and firm. Clara's, gentler but insistent. "He's strong," Sarah hissed. "Stronger than I thought. We can't waste that." Clara answered. "He's also tired, Sarah. You can see it in his eyes. If we push too hard, he'll bolt. And then what?" The words struck Caleb like a hammer. Waste that? Push too hard? His stomach knotted. Whatever their kindness, it wasn't rooted in charity alone. They had a plan, and somehow, he was at the center of it. Caleb lay back down, staring at the ceiling. He'd been taken in before, by ranch bosses, by men who promised wages, by women who promised comfort. All of them had wanted something. All of them had left scars. The only question now was whether Sarah and Clara meant to heal him, or use him until he broke. Caleb had been under their roof for nearly 2 weeks, and though he tried to carry his weight, he could not ignore the gnawing unease that grew each night. Sarah had him fixing fence posts along the north pasture, hammering nails with a steady hand, while Clara insisted he eat full meals so his strength might return. On the surface, it seemed simple kindness, but there were shadows in the way they spoke when they thought he wasn't listening. One evening, after the chores were done and the children had gone to sleep, Caleb lingered near the back porch, sharpening his old knife by lamplight. Through the thin walls of the cabin he heard the women's voices, hushed but strained. "You brought him in, Sarah," Clara whispered fiercely. "But what if he leaves before we know if he's truly the man we need?" "He won't leave," Sarah replied, her tone hard. "Not if we give him reason to stay. The ranch needs a strong hand, and the children," her voice caught. "The children deserve protection." Clara sighed, softer now, "I know. But he's not like the others. There's something broken in him. If he finds out why we really wanted him here, then we'll deal with that when the time comes," Sarah said sharply, ending the conversation. Caleb's hand froze on the knife. So it was true. Their kindness had not been offered freely. They needed him, but for what purpose? Was he a laborer, a shield, or something else entirely? That night, when he finally lay on the narrow cot they had given him, Caleb could not close his eyes. He stared at the wooden beams above, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. Memories of betrayal from long ago crept back. Old friends who had left him to bleed in the dirt. A family he had lost because he trusted the wrong hands. Yet the faces of Sarah's children, bright, innocent, laughing when he showed them how to mend a bridle, haunted him just as strongly. If the mothers meant to use him, he thought grimly, then he would discover how. But for now, he would stay. Not because of Sarah's sharp words, nor Clara's soft concern, but because of those children who deserved better than the harsh world waiting outside. And so, beneath the silence of the prairie night, Caleb vowed to uncover the truth. Caleb sat outside the cabin that night, the glow of the lantern spilling faint light across the porch boards. The air was dry and sharp, the kind that carried every creak of the wooden fences and every restless breath of the horses in the pen. He thought he had found some peace here, working during the day, resting at night, even daring to enjoy the laughter of the children, who had begun to call him Mr. Caleb, with shy smiles. But as the hours stretched, he began to realize that peace in this house was not as steady as it seemed. Through the thin wall behind him, voices rose to women, speaking in hurried whispers, their tones sharper than they had ever shown in the daylight. Sarah's voice came first, low and steady, but full of warning. "We don't even know if we can trust him. Taking him in was one thing, but letting him stay longer, what if he brings trouble here? And what if he's the answer we've been praying for? You saw the way he fixed the corral, the way the children look at him. He's strong, Sarah, stronger than we can be alone." There was silence, broken only by the sound of the wind rattling a loose shutter. Caleb's heart tightened. They hadn't taken him in only out of kindness. There was something else at play, something unspoken. "We can't let him know, not yet. If he finds out why we really brought him here, he'll leave. And we can't afford that." The words cut through him deeper than he expected. He thought of the meals they had shared, of the way Clara had smiled when he carried water from the well, of Sarah's guarded eyes when she watched him work. Had all of it been a mask? Or was there truth in their kindness, truth tangled with fear? Caleb sat back, the weight of the suitcases at his feet suddenly feeling heavier than ever, though they were empty now. For the first time in years, he had allowed himself to believe in a place where he might rest. But now, with the secrets whispering through the walls, he wondered if he had walked into salvation or into another kind of trap.